Let's start over in the US. We've had lots of economic data out of the US, which has proved very good for markets. Yesterday we had the US home sales surprising the market by increasing 1%, although the market was expecting it to be flat. What is your take on the US situation at the moment?
Yeah, housing is key because, it led us into this crisis in the first place. People used their homes as ATM machines, to be perfectly frank. So if you're going to see a recovery in housing, and it has been happening for probably about the last 4 or 5 months, where you're seeing real information that suggests that the housing market is starting to bottom in some key areas. There's some other areas where they went a little bit hog wild, like in Vegas, as they always do. But I suspect if you see more stabilization, because 1% growth on a number that's probably pretty rubbish, because this time last year we were looking at those very same home sales, you can bet they were showing some big minus signs in front of them and somewhere towards 10% or beyond. So I think to take this data from where it comes, it's a 12-month view, and we're a lot better off than we were in January last year, but there's still quite a big inventory there, and that's a bit of a problem. And the first-time tax credit for first-time homeowners has, I think it's expired, so you're probably going to see the home sales probably level off for a little bit. It's more important what the prices do. So have a look every month at that Case-Shiller price index to get a reasonable view of whether or not the prices are starting to bottom, because that's when people's confidence will come back, where they say, okay, I've got a backstop.
But now this data is proving very positive for the market at the moment, but the other thing that's also proving very positive is the employment side. It seems that there might be an improvement in employment in the US at the moment. We have US, the NonFarm Payrolls coming out on Friday. Do you think that we are going to see an improvement as we did in the employment part of the ISM?
I think so. I mean, you actually saw your first positive read, although on a revision in November last year. So we actually did see a positive employment number last year. December was a little bit disappointing. Lots of people put it down to perhaps some bad weather. Extreme cold, the worst winter, I think, in 35 years. So there was a reluctance, obviously, for people to go out in the retail space, and therefore, by a function of being less consumers, then there's less people to hire. I think what's been encouraging, again, if you look at a 6 to 12 month trend, is that the temp jobs have come back quite strongly. So I think the consensus for this number is actually 0. It's for no jobs lost, no jobs gained. But you've got to look again at the sector specific, because construction has been shedding jobs, massive amount of jobs, and that all goes back to the overstocked inventory, too many houses. But the other more worrying factor is that US manufacturing jobs have been lost over a decade. So, if they want to get back to a level where they can compete on a global level as a manufacturing company, and let's face it, I mean, they've got some fantastic ingenuity. You only have to look in the tech sector to realize that the Americans are still way ahead. So if there's going to be a lot of focus in reviving manufacturing jobs, you could actually see all the other bolt-on stuff, all the normal, because they're largely driven by consumers. So that's more than 70% of their entire economy is consumer-based. So it's everything that goes around that. So if we're in a period where, as it was showed in that personal income data, I think it was Monday, that people are starting to save more, it's not necessarily a good thing in the short term, but perhaps longer term, it means people have obviously been able to repair their own personal balance sheets and get to a level.
But they're not spending more.
Well, this is the problem, because the America's economy, 70% is consumer driven. So if people, A, don't have access to the same finance they had before, or B, are reluctant because they're not quite sure. But if, again, as you see a stabilization in home prices, and if you see a stabilization in the employment numbers, then you get a sense of where we're going. But whether or not you're going to see massive, and say, look 4 or 5 months down the line and say, oh, they're creating 200,000 jobs a month, I don't know. I think the jury's still out on that one.
But if we then take that into consideration when we look at the actual growth of the US, do you think that the growth is now going to be sustained and that we're going to see positive GDP from here going forward? Or do you think that there might be a dip on the way again?
Ammerance, I think we live in a very different world, and people have definitely recognized that there's an economic shift happening here globally. But notwithstanding that, I think we were chatting off air, and we suggested people take this into context, the growth that you see in China and India. I think China is the same economic size as California, and India is the same economic size as Texas. So that just shows
you have to see everything in context.
Exactly. But the massive growth that you've seen in the last decade, if that were to continue, even at an above 6-7% click, you're seeing massive new entrants. And this is a whole host of new consumers who can pick up the cudgels where the US left off. Now, the big key now for the Chinese authorities is actually to turn their people into consumers, because they're traditionally fantastic savers. And in fact, notwithstanding all the progress that's been made, they're actually saving more now than they were a decade ago. So you don't exactly want them to go completely hog wild. And notwithstanding all the concerns you've seen over credit and credit tightening, etc., it's probably because there is not a lot of stock. And you hear of oversupply in Shanghai, of buildings standing empty. But the same occurred in the early 90s, and those buildings were filled within 18 months. So it's almost that Kevin Costner Field of Dreams movie, build them a field and they will come.